You are what you eat, and if you give the dietary habits of your little Sims and workers and resources a good look, you'll realize they are largely made of transistors, processors, and circuit boards. Oh, of course, there's clothes and food and meat that isn't food, and of course, good old booze. But as years go on, the appetites of your citizens grow in sophistication. The game sure tells they're crazy for radios, TVs, and personal computers, but we all know it's egg games, synthesizers, and electric massagers. Last time in the Soviet Republic of Arab Map, we were stuck way back in the 1960s trying to choose the first industry to keep our budget afloat, and found out that fashion and hazardous waste was not the way to go, and bread and alcohol was. But this reprieve has been short-lived as a much crunchier menace is entering the comfy flats of the proletariat. What it means to you, the first secretary of this particular district committee, is that decade after decade, the consumption of electronics soars with your rising population, and eventually, every time you build a shopping center, you just get a huge dip in your savings because of the big lump of electronics you have to buy to fill the shelves. Just take a look at what my city of 14,000 consumed between 1960 and 1985. I know, the massagers are far ahead of food in gross value and just dwarf everything else you people want. And if you don't have a production of electronics of your own, it's going to quickly turn into the biggest import item you have to deal with. We can't ban it, sadly, so let's look at ways to make this whole debacle a bit easier on our purse, and maybe even earn a few kopecks in the process. Approach number 1, the way of least resistance, the Brezhnev way. At the beginning of the game, you get a lot of rubles, and like me, you'll probably end up mostly relying on rubles in your foreign trade. This is fine, except that rubles lose a lot of value relative to the dollar starting in mid-70s. That's not true for oil and coal though, where 1 ruble keeps paying for just a little less than $1. This means that you can specialize in exporting hydrocarbons to the West and to spend your hardly earned dollary dues to buy your electronics there. Or you could even try to become a pipeline leech, importing the coal and oil cheaply from the Soviets and then exporting it at normal prices to the West. Not that it will make you rich, but it will shave off some of the burden buying those consumer goods. Approach number 2 is a bit more involved, but doesn't take half a brain to figure out. Need electronics? Get an electronics factory! It's 1985, so there should be plenty of boffins at your many universities to research it. Just get the tech, build it, buy the inputs, and voila, 3.4 tons of personal desktop computers dropping into your warehouses every day. Our reference city of 14,000 only consumed 156 tons that year, and to cover that, you only need about an eighth of the factory's maximum capacity. So, is it actually economical to do this? Let's assume you only want to cover your internal consumption and will not run the factory at full capacity. Not gonna lie, you need those 156 tons, bro. Pronto! A simple calculation of the buy price of all of the inputs and the cost of your internal labor versus the value of the product you put out is that you get a 17% discount. This factory takes 830,000 rubles and gets you 1 million rubles worth of electronics. For that 156 tons you consume every year, this means over 183,000 rubles you won't have to spend. But this is advanced technology, you might say, and the factory probably isn't cheap, so the obvious next question is how quickly investing in one pays off. But that question is wrong, actually. In 1985 prices and using local labor, the cost of the electronics plant turns out to be rather tame and comparable in that regard to, say, a food factory. With 183,000 in profits a year, it will pay off in about 4 months. Not counting the roads and vehicles you'll need for logistics, but they won't hit the idea hard enough to kill it. And then, if you look at the 1985 trade balance of my city, which let's not forget mostly feeds itself on food and alcohol and meat, but that's a story for after bedtime, kids, 183,000 effectively doubles the difference between the import and the export. Nifty. Although if you do decide to build the electronics factory, you might probably have to borrow a bit to buy all of the expensive raw materials it needs to function. But beside that, it's compact, it doesn't process a lot of stuff, meaning extra easy logistics, and it produces very little pollution, about as much as a pigsty. All this means that if your heart isn't in electric massagers and you're really building towards that uranium complex of the future, you can just plop this neat little electronics making package somewhere in between the construction office and the garbage containers and just enjoy the easy benefits of assembling your own tellies and radios. But you know me, and my heart is very much in electric massagers, and especially in making exorbitant, disgusting piles of them, dumping them into trains and selling them abroad for trillions, zillions of rublerinos. So here's approach number 3. The deal with the devil, aka commodity production. Here's the problem with importing all of the inputs and exporting all of the electronics you make. Because of the buy-sell price difference, the 17% discount we talked about in the previous section deflates down to 8% in exports. So for every million rubles of electronics you sell, you pay 920 grand for the inputs. This is borderline pointless, and as you can see, the oil pump never tires to nod an agreement, as it keeps giving you money for free. The solution to this? Well, we need to figure out how to make at least some of the raw materials for electronics. And all that without having to build a billion factories to provide all of them right now. We just need to give that profit margin a good boost. And the obvious answer comes in the form of electrical components. Of course, they're the most expensive item on the list, but it's also that oh so very conveniently 2 electrical components factories produce enough electrical components to feed 3 electronics plants. And then a bit more to cover all your construction needs and whatever other arcane use for electrical components you can imagine. Another advantage is that most of the inputs for these 2 types of factories fit in a general goods warehouse. So you can build the 2 electrical plus 3 electronics combo around a really big warehouse. And now look at this beauty. I have plopped that open storage for the steel electrical needs, but ain't it all perfect? Or is it? The 5-factory combine may gobble up a god-awful amount of expensive resources, but it cranks out a maximum of 10.5 tons of electronics a day. And the inputs eat up only 78% of your export revenue for a massive profit margin of 22% compared to the puny 8% without the electrical factories. In raw numbers, these 3 factories generate a maximum of almost 15 grand a day, or 5,300,000 rubles a year. It's gobsmackingly massive. Of course, it's gonna cost a lot to build the municipal infrastructure to accommodate the 750 workers the combine needs, as well as all of the logistics and probably some expensive railway rolling stock for transporting the stuff to and fro, but the 3-4 million rubles you'll have to borrow to get all of this will pay off very quickly, and you'll have to get used to having 6 and 7 figures in your bank account. So go forth, build hard, and cover the earth in electric massagers. But before I leave, a quick point about this little appendix. This is a steel recycling plant which fits the electrical combine perfectly. I still mostly have to buy the scrap it consumes, but it can potentially make far more steel than the electrical factories need. It does not demand a lot of workers, and it gives you a tiny edge on the price difference. It's really a tiny drop in the bucket at about 2.5% price decrease over normal steel, but it's very cheap to build, and the margin is a lot higher for every container of metal scrap your country produces itself and doesn't export. Also, given the small number of workers it needs, the steel recycler can just sit there and slowly pile up the slightly cheaper steel for any construction you might be doing. Getting even a small discount on plastic waste and plastic with a plastic recycler would have been so much nicer, but the 3+2 electric combine consumes so god-awful much of the stuff that you need a 5th dimension to fit all of those plastic recyclers to the warehouse. This is another example of the kind of thinking you have to apply with waste management, and steel wins this particular comparison and ends up in the combine. So, I guess our next step will be to get proper plastic factories going, and maybe find some more uses for oil than just burning it to power games and relaxer pistols.